I think many older gamers today will agree with the sentiment that games back then were way better than games in the modern era. They didn't have any live service stuff, there weren't any microtransactions, there weren't these always online requirements, and they were way cheaper. Many of the older gamers who've been gaming since before 2010 might even consider that time period to be the golden age of gaming. I remember back when I was in middle school, every kid from my neighborhood would gather at my friend's house every Sunday and we would play 4-player split-screen multiplayer on Halo 3, King of the Hill, or Infection all day long, until we had to go home and go to bed for school the next day. Personally, I can attest that these were some of the best gaming memories I've experienced in my life, and I would love to relive those days again. Back when things were simpler and we didn't have a mountain of adult responsibilities in our lives. And I think a lot of people here have experienced something similar to that effect. That's probably why many would still say that this is the best period in time to be a gamer. But I want to play devil's advocate for a second here. Were games really better back then? Or is it just our vision being heavily clouded by so much nostalgia that we can't see right through our biases? Look, I do understand why a lot of people would say that modern games are so bad right now, and how older games were so much better. There are a lot of terrible games that are releasing right now, and even more that are filled with so much unnecessary BS like battle passes, microtransactions, or paid downloadable content. And not only that, but most of them were considered downgrades to the previous games in their long-running franchises because they either removed a lot of fan-favorite core features or completely destroyed the lore of the beloved characters. If you were around video games for a decently long time like I've been, then you would have been around long enough to see all your favorite game franchises become a shell of their former selves. Games that used to bring you so much joy when you were younger, now for some reason just don't hit the same anymore. And it's really depressing if you're an older gamer seeing how modern gaming is going this way. However, I'm gonna be that one guy that's gonna have an unpopular opinion and say that gaming today is still great. Yes, I know that obviously there are still plenty of stinkers that come out here and there, and sometimes they're funny to point and laugh at, like that Gollum game. But to say that the entirety of the modern era of games as a whole is worse than the past is just not true, because the reality is that this is how the gaming industry has always been. There have always been amazing games that are remembered for the rest of time, and there have always been terrible ones that are released alongside them. Games didn't all of a sudden start to become bad within the last few years. They've always existed for the entirety of the video game industry. It's just that people tend to forget about the terrible experiences from the bad titles and only remember the fun ones. They repressed the unpleasant titles from their memories because who would want to remember something like Superman 64 or E.T.? Nobody, that's who. It would be like that one time in SpongeBob where those police officers were showing a poorly drawn picture of SpongeBob to Patrick and he just started screaming every time they pulled it up.
Now we're gonna show you this picture again, and you tell us if you've seen this guy, understand?
Yeah,
Okay.
Horrible!
In my opinion, this is all just nostalgia bias. People are looking at the past with rose-tinted glasses because that was during the time in their lives where they were young and full of whimsy, where they saw every title as a brand new adventure because they were once a starry-eyed youth that found the good in everything. And now, as they became older, they've grown more jaded towards gaming because they've watched their favorite childhood hobby completely change inside out, turning into something that they no longer recognize. Video game franchises that they grew up with getting killed off and having their corpse be disfigured and puppeteered for financial gain. From that perspective, I could see why someone would resent the current state of the gaming industry. However, god-awful games that nearly destroyed their franchises have always existed since forever, and it's no different today than it was 10 or 15 years ago. For example, back in 2003, Capcom released Devil May Cry 2 in order to capitalize on the massive popularity that Devil May Cry 1 garnered, but unfortunately the sequel was completely different from the first game. Dante's personality was totally changed to something more boring, the gameplay wasn't as fun, and the story just sucked. Nothing about it was anything like the prequel because for some reason they decided that they need to shake up the formula that was already working. And because of that, Devil May Cry 2 was regarded as the worst mainline game in the series. Why Capcom wanted to take the franchise in this direction after such an overwhelming positive reception to the first game is anyone's guess. But you would think they learned their lesson for sure after the backlash to this title, except something similar would happen a decade later when they tried rebooting the franchise with DMC Devil May Cry. Another game that was also terribly received by the fanbase because it tried to fix something that wasn't broken. And while realistically it wasn't a bad game overall, it was just a title that fans felt like it didn't deserve to hold the DMC name. Nobody wanted Capcom to reboot the Devil May Cry series, period, especially into something like this.
You don't look a day over 12,000. Fuck you! Fuck you! Fuck you!
And don't get me wrong, there were plenty of amazing games that came out around this time period, but for every trove of treasure out there, I could point to an equal number of absolute duds. Does anyone still remember Ride to Hell Retribution? A game that was released back in 2013, and it was so bad that it easily took the crown of worst game of the year automatically, probably even for the decade. Or how about Sonic 06, a game that was so bad that it killed a lot of momentum the Sonic franchise had for a couple of years. And to this day, it's still considered as one of the worst Sonic titles of all time. I know it's easy for someone to look at a modern title filled with all the stuff that they despise and say that modern gaming is dead, but you can just as easily look at an older game and say the same thing about them. People were probably complaining about the same stuff we're complaining about today even 10 years ago. In my opinion, it really just depends on where you are in life and what your attitude towards gaming is in general. But the thing is that I've always been a glass half full kind of guy. I always try to see the good in things, especially video games, even though I can be a harsh critic sometimes. And to me, there are always great games being released every single year, and there are even more game studios who are trying to break into the industry with fantastic titles. For example, Expedition 33, one of the best games to release this year and in the history of gaming in general, which was made from a small, passionate team of 30 individuals who just wanted to make an RPG inspired by the games they grew up on. It didn't feel like there were any corporate interests interfering with the creative direction of the title. It didn't feel like the devs were trying to squeeze every nickel and dime out of the players at every step of the way. Sandfall Studios genuinely just wanted to make a great game that people enjoyed playing. That's it. And these aren't the only devs trying to honestly make good games, like Larian Studios, who've been crafting amazing CRPGs for decades now. Before their big breakout into the massive mainstream audience with Baldur's Gate 3, they were working on the Divinity Original Sin series, which is genuinely one of the most criminally unknown games ever. Everybody loved Baldur's Gate 3, and I'm glad people loved it, but what about the other games that nobody ever talks about? Games like Disco Elysium and other hidden gems like that went completely under the radar because they weren't marketed as much. And that just leaves me thinking, how many awesome titles like these just go completely unnoticed by the large majority of people? I really do think that the lack of knowledge of these gems out there really plays a major role in why so many people do not like modern games. Call me naive, but I really do think that we're entering into another golden age of gaming now, with so many up and coming studios that were established with the sole intention of just trying to make good games. Sure, some of them might not be from studios that you're familiar with, but they're still pretty much the same quality altogether, especially coming from countries outside of the West. Like Stellar Blade, for example, a game from a Korean studio that was only known for making mobile games in the past, trying their hand at developing a fully fledged AAA title for the first time since their studio inception, and it was a massive success. They were able to sell millions of copies because Shift Up prioritized just making a good game that interests gamers first and foremost. Or if that's not really up to your speed, then there's also Metaphor ReFantazio, a game from the well-known Atlas studio that's legitimately one of the best turn-based JRPGs that's been released within the past 5 years. Or if you want to go more indie, then there's Balatro, a poker-themed roguelike released last year that was made by one guy. Look, I can go on and on forever about all the amazing titles that have come out within the last few years alone, but we would be here all day. The point is that there will always be good games out there if you look for them. Just because there are a few stinkers every now and then doesn't mean that you should write off the entire generation of video games. Sure, there might be times where it's in a bit of a slump, however even then there will always be developers who are willing to take up the mantle of the savior of gaming. Okay, well maybe that's a bit too dramatic. They just want to make good games without too much of the corporate interests meddling within it, which is becoming less and less common nowadays. But at the end of the day, if you found yourself feeling like gaming isn't fun anymore, then maybe try something new, something that you wouldn't normally play. Who knows, you might end up liking it. Or you could always just go outside or something, I don't know. But that's just me. What do you think? Do you agree or disagree? Let me know down below to make sure to like, comment, subscribe for more content in the future. See ya.